Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight we have a great discussion. We're talking vintage nostalgia acts. The good, the bad, the ugly. The panel's here. Let's talk about it. Let's keep it interactive. Let's do it. Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight we have a topic that was suggested by Philip over here to my, well, I guess he's to my left. I don't know how everyone else sees him, but he is here. This is his topic. So we were talking, why are there so many vintage nostalgia acts today? Are they viable or just a gimmick? So Philip, he brought this up. Why don't you explain it a little bit, and then we'll just go on from there. And before you do, let me welcome, well, we've got two members of the Rock. We've got the Elder of Rock, and we've got the Parish of Rock. So anyway, Philip, take it away. Explain this topic, and we're just going to go from there, and let's just do it. Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, I need to find myself a psynonym with rock, because now I'm like the odd man out.
I know. It's like if you all had like something with rock, I'd be on this by myself. I'd be canceled out. So,
Anyway, so like, I mean, in the noughties and especially I think in the 2010s and onward, we've seen like a really great proliferation of many bands that in so many ways feel like a throwback. Basically, like that's let's say another word to kind of like define or unpack the term like vintage, which maybe is a bit vague. And yeah, basically many bands where even like the way they dress, the style of dressing sometimes really feels like a clear throwback to the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. Many such bands, an obvious example, we'll talk a lot about them, I guess, is Greta Van Fleet, are described as vintage, nostalgia, a throwback to Zeppelin, a throwback to the 70s, either in terms of their sound, in terms of their compositions, their production, or all of those. And you are also getting many like new movements. For example, you have, in the last, 10 or more years, you have the new wave of traditional heavy metal. So basically bands like Enforcer, Visigoth, Riot City, from, a lot of them from Sweden, some of them from Canada, the US, and they all basically play like a revamped version of traditional heavy metal, lots of Judas Priest, lots of Maiden or Riot, for instance, but they call them new wave of traditional metal. And they really do feel like a throwback to the 80s. And their stage appearance is like very 80s. And let's face it, there's a nostalgia, a perpetual nostalgia for the 80s. So many, you hear like rock radio, 80s rock radio everywhere all the time. Like the 80s hits, either it's pop rock, disco, metal, whatever, are just like, they're going to play forever on the radio, no matter like 100 years from now, whatever, So yeah, like there are more and more and more bands that basically feel like, and they're classified as some kind of nostalgia or vintage act. And it just makes me wonder, like, indeed, are they a gimmick? Are they viable or not? And in addition to that, is it like a symptom of our times of the 2010s and onward that there's like no more pioneering bands, nothing new anymore? Do we just have to somehow recycle the past and kind of like play on it and to make something new? But and here's my last word on sort of like unpacking this topic. Were Led Zeppelin a nostalgia band? Especially with their first album, maybe even their first 4 albums, a lot of it was basically, as we know, plagiarizing bluesmen, Delta bluesmen of the 50s and 60s, and even the early first quarter of the century. So in a way, that was also a kind of nostalgia. So I don't know. I want to hear what everyone else has to say and bring up some examples.
I will say this is a fascinating topic. So in regards to Led Zeppelin. Yeah, we know what they were influenced by. All those blues artists. A lot of, well, we wouldn't have rock and roll today. What's left of rock and roll? There's really not much.
Hmm.
Because look at the pop charts. There's no rock anymore.
No,
But
no.
look at what Led Zeppelin did, or the Yardbirds. Look at all those
Cream.
bands back in the
Yeah.
60s. They were the Beatles. When they first started, they were doing all covers of, uh, black artists. Let's say that.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Buddy Holly, Beatles, like
Buddy Holly,
and
Little
Elvis.
Richard. Everything
Yeah,
in
but you
rock
see,
and roll's been reprocessed pretty much.
yeah.
Yeah,
But there was an element of innovation in what the Beatles did or what the
yeah,
Yardbirds did. Even Zeppelin, obviously, there was a lot of innovation. But when you hear a band like Greta Van Fleet, to bring
Mhm.
that example again, me personally, and I think very many more, despite the fact that they have millions of fans, there's nothing innovative at all. It feels like they are really recycling, plagiarizing,
But are they
well,
recycling or are they just doing what they want to do? I
a bit
mean,
of
they might
everything.
want to just play rock and roll and this is what comes out.
But it's just so blatant how
it
it's
is a little blatant, but also, but in the
But
'80s,
is
don't
it
forget,
blatant? I don't know. Is it?
but in the '80s we had Kingdom Come and that kind of Zeppelin thing. Whitesnake was kind of seen as, at least with David Coverdale took it over. The '87 was kind of seen as a Zeppelin ripoff. You had Bonham do his first band, Jason Bonham, which was exact, was very Zeppelin-y. And so you kind of had that in the '80s with Zeppelin. I just think it's a matter of people putting their own spin on it.
yeah. Well,
Greta
I
Van
guess an
Fleet, I've only heard their
example,
first two albums. I haven't
And
heard anything
that's
recently.
but that's exactly what Led Zeppelin did. They put their own spin on it.
Yeah.
yeah,
The
but
Beatles, they put their own spin on it. We could keep going back.
what you hear today a lot, and this is again where I came up with this idea, is that it's not just bands that are clearly influenced by former masters or whatever, but more like bands that really feel like a throwback. So like, like an obvious example, another one is Ghost, right? Ghost are like they do their own thing, and
Yeah.
they do
Yeah.
have their own kind of brand name, obviously, now that they're so huge. But I mean, this music, this sound, everything, it really feels like a throwback to some previous era. So,
They sound very 80s to
Ghost
me. I mean, obviously Ghost is a mix of ABBA and
Oyster Cult, yeah.
Blue Oyster Cult or Def
and
Leppard, whatever you
Sabbath,
want to
the little
call it, but
Black
there's a
Sabbath thing.
lot of ABBA in Ghost. I know a lot of you
Yeah.
metal
They did a
fans
cover
may
of an
like
ABBA
want to
song.
roll over, but there's a lot of ABBA in
They
that
did
thing.
they did a cover of I'm a Marionette too.
Mhm.
So what are your examples, guys? Like what do you have any preferred bands or not?
I mean, I
Elder,
love
go ahead,
Ghost.
Elder, start us
Well,
off.
I love Ghost a lot. I don't really see them as a nostalgia band though, is really because I thought to me they didn't. I mean, I'm not a Blue Oyster Cult fan, so maybe that's why. But to me they didn't really sound. They sounded a lot different than anything else that was coming out at that time. They came out around 2010, I think. And to me actually when I first heard Ghost, their first album, and we didn't know there were who any of them were. I thought it was maybe a King Diamond side project, and he was doing
Yeah.
something where he didn't want to sing his, falsetto type stuff and bring out another part of his voice. Obviously, that wasn't the case, but so I saw Ghost as something really cool and different. Not necessarily a nostalgia act. As far as a nostalgia act, I don't know. I'm really hard to think. Greta Van Fleet is like a good one. I mean, you have some metal bands uh, like Burning Witches, who are very much of a like kind of a Judas Priest
Yeah.
type of band metal. But I don't really see anybody really blatantly ripping off though anybody. I definitely see the influences, but I see a lot of bands putting their own spin on it.
Yeah.
You know?
What about the Black Keys?
Black Keys, I don't really know that well, so I don't know.
I mean, they
Akron
feel like
band,
a
Akron,
total.
Ohio band. I think the Black Keys are like in a category by themselves. They just do what they do. I don't
Well,
really
I mean,
think.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm
they're influenced, but I don't. I just think that they just do what they do.
I'm quite a big Black Keys fan, and I think the Black Keys is what I'd class a glam rock band. A lot of their sound is like the 70s glam rock. The drumming is very similar, catchy songs, but I still think there's a modern twist to it. I don't think they sound exactly like a glam rock band from the 70s. You can hear things, there's a shuffle there like a Mungo Jerry on some of their songs, but they don't. But if you played them back to back, you wouldn't think one was directly ripping off the other. I don't think so. I think the Black Keys stand in their own right, and I think it's cool that they're showing influences back from the early 70s. Why wouldn't they? If that's the music they like. So I think the Black Keys are fine. I'm not sure I'd put them in quite the same category as Greta Van Fleet, who essentially sound like they are trying to be Led Zeppelin. Most of the bands you hear influences of two or three bands, maybe two or three bands from the same era, but you see influences from various bands. But there's a few where you can't hear more than one influence. Having said that, though, I like Greta Van Fleet. I've seen them live a few times. They're really good live. I buy their stuff. I don't, but yeah, they are very derivative rather than influence would be my take on them.
That's exactly the word I wrote in my notes, derivative.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
you know
think
that
about
also
this. I'm going to throw this out to the panel just for the heck of it. What new music has really happened since... Think about it. We've had rock and roll, and then the Beatles took it off. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is, what has really been innovative within music other than hip hop and rap that happened in 1979? There really hasn't been anything that's been new.
Derivative. No, sorry, they weren't derivative. They were influenced. They were influenced by soul and R&B. Particularly if you listen to the music. You listen to Sugar Hill Gang, that was a funk musically. They have been spoken.
Good times, really.
Might have been
right, but they're taking that from Chic.
But musically. So, I think most of music, if not almost all music, is influenced by what goes before.
Of course,
rock and roll was influenced by the blues. Blues was influenced to some extent by jazz and was influenced by gospel. And, you go back and listen to classical music. Classical music is influenced by earlier classical music. So everything is an evolution. I don't think anybody has come along that has been absolutely, totally radical and done something very different. And those who have probably have come along have not been commercial, so nobody's known about them.
That's the thing. There has been, but they haven't been commercially successful. Yeah, they haven't been commercially successful. There have been some bands like I would say Baby Metal has probably done something really different, but they're not. They're actually getting more popular. But you can't say that.
Anything different. What they did was they combined two types of music. They combined
a few different,
that K-pop, Japanese pop. And they combined that with heavy metal.
Nobody had done that yet.
The way they brought it together, and if you like, the fusion was new, but the two musical styles that they were fusing wasn't new. The two musical styles were fairly well established.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about David Bowie being an innovator, and I love David Bowie, but there was nothing he did that hadn't been done before. It was just the way he brought it together and the kind of the way he assembled it, if you like.
Yeah.
But I think music is all about influences and progression.
I think though that there is, again, this is why I came up with this topic, and I think that maybe the term nostalgia vintage is they're a bit misunderstood, these terms. There are bands that are influenced, and then there are bands that feel like an obvious throwback, and that there is a desire to revive the 70s or the 80s. Like when I see, for example, a contemporary band, if you know them, Cadaver with a K and A, they're a pretty cool band. And their brand of psychedelic stoner rock in terms of the compositions and the sound, but even in their stage presence, it feels like they are trying to revive a certain period
Yeah.
where music sounded and looked and felt like this.
Yeah, that's
And
like a lot of the
that-
doom metal that's out there is,
Yeah.
very 70s. If influence sound and stage presence wise, they're very much like that. A lot of doom metal, stoner metal, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, I have a little list here with some of my preferred bands, and like one band that really stands out for me. They appeared, well, they've existed for a few years already, since the early 2010s, but last year they made a big splash, very much thanks to some good publicity by drummer Mike Portnoy. It's a duo from Canada called Crownlands from Ontario, just
Okay.
two guys. Singer drummer Cody Bowles and guitar, bass, and keyboard player Kevin Comeau, and they wrote an album called Fearless. And this album, it's obvious to me why Mike Portnoy recommended it. The opening track, which is around 18 or 19 minutes, when you hear it, it's like, whoa, these guys are playing Rush better than Rush. It's like you are hearing these guys reviving in 2023 hemispheres. They are totally like referencing clearly the sound, the style, the virtuosity, everything of hemispheres. And although that might sound derivative, if you hear this opening track, but basically the whole album, they do it so well. It's like you're just taken back to 1970, 78, and you're listening to like the best period of Rush for the first time. It's incredible. I was just blown away.
But Philip, you're saying that this is original music, though.
Well,
What they've written. It's not like them.
It's a new band.
Right? Okay. What's the name of the
new
band again?
So the band is called Crownlands, and the album is called Fearless.
Okay.
But it split
Rush.
It split Rush fans down the middle, though, hasn't it? Because I've seen quite a lot on Twitter about them. And there's those that love it because, as you say, it's classic Rush, which even Rush hasn't done for 40 years, So it's classic Rush, all the intricacies, it's brilliant. And then you get the others that are saying, well, if I want to listen to that music, I'll listen to Hemispheres. Why do I need to listen to somebody else sounding like Hemispheres? So it kind of splits the fan base down. Well, I won't say the fan base down the middle, but the ones I've seen commenting, it's split kind of 50-50 between those that think it's genius and those that think it's a poor photocopy.
Parish, you have a good point. I had a buddy, all right, let's look at the 60s for a lot of innovation, and there were a lot of bands in the early 80s that kind of took what was done in the 60s and kind of did their own. Let's look at REM, because think about the early REM is very 60s oriented. It could have been, they have a different twist on it. But my buddy would say, well, Grant, why would you listen to a lot of these bands? Because, nothing is really that new other than rap. And now we're talking rap like, when it came along, he said, why don't you just listen to the Kinks? Why don't you listen just to the Beatles and the Stones back in the day? Because a lot of these bands are just recycling a lot of this. And why listen to somebody that's not an original when you can just go back and listen to the originator? So you've got that too. But we're talking the 80s, Well,
and I'll go back even further. I remember
back further
in the UK who used to harp on about how much he liked ELO, because ELO in the 1970s was the closest you got to anybody doing what the Beatles did in the 60s.
Correct.
So to him, he liked ELO because he liked the Beatles and he thought it was a continuation. So, as I say, I love ELO, and I see influences from the Beatles, but I don't see them as close as this DJ did.
Well, didn't Jeff Lynne say basically they picked up where I'm a Walrus left off?
Yeah.
They admitted it.
Yeah, but that's not sounding like they used to. That's sounding like a projection of where they thought they might be going, which I think is slightly different.
Yeah.
But they were very Beatlesque, you have to admit.
I don't hear it.
I hear that a lot about people with stoner metal. They'll say, well, why, it's like, this is like Black Sabbath. Well, then I'll just listen to Black Sabbath. It's the same, it's
same
like,
thing.
It's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
but it's
what's interesting is that some of these new bands can be a gateway for younger audiences
yes,
to listen to Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, ABBA.
Good point. It's
yes.
like a gateway drug. So you hear one of these new bands and you're going, well, I love this. Let me investigate and like go back and see what else is out there. And then you can get turned on to maybe some of those older acts. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
In preparation for today, I mean, over the last week or so, I've been posting on Twitter, or X, as we all know, it's now called, my favourite albums of this year, and I thought, and kind of doing a mini review, and I thought I'd go through those because I thought actually when I was looking at it, it was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, Revolution Saints, I've put down really good, reminds me of Journey. Wardour Street by the UK band Choir Boys. I think they're called London Choir Boys over there. A band from the late 80s.
Yeah.
But I put really, really good album. Reminds me of The Faces. I've got The New Roses. Best 80s inspired glam rock album this decade. I've got The Last Dinner Party. 21st century glam rock with elements of Queen, ELO, and Sparks. So I'm going through all these new bands, and what am I doing? Comparing them with what I used to like in the past. And it kind of dawned on me, isn't that what these nostalgia acts? That's why people like them.
It takes them back to when they were young.
Like the familiarity, it's like a comfort blanket.
Yeah, it takes them back to when they were young,
Yeah.
and that's what they like, and they feel comfort. Yeah,
And then
the
almost top
question
of the
is-
list was Cats in Space. And everybody who reviews Cats in Space always says it's like going back to the 70s, a combination of 10cc, ELO, Journey, all of that kind of mixed together. So all of these bands I've just mentioned are newish, apart from the Choir Boys, are newish bands. Right. You know, bands from the last 10 years, and yet all of them have deep roots back into the part, and that's why I like them. So coming back to the question about is it viable or just a gimmick, let's assume for a moment they are vintage or nostalgia acts, because they're certainly nostalgic if I'm comparing them with the past, I guess, then I would say, yes, they are valid. They're selling records. People are seeing them live. People are enjoying the music. So I think that's all that matters, really. And it doesn't matter if I think Greta Van Fleet sound too much like Led Zeppelin at times. If people like the records, buy the records and want to see them live, then I think that makes them valid.
Also maybe helps that there isn't a Led Zeppelin together now to be out there. Like some bands, like they'll have their influences still playing and being a band themselves, whereas Rush and Led Zeppelin, you know, obviously they're not going to be touring or doing any more together anymore. So I think that makes them maybe a little bit more viable too, to take up that space a little bit where those bands once were.
Well, there's certainly a step up, in my view, from a tribute band. I'd much prefer to see a new band in the style of rather than a tribute band.
And this kind of opens this up as well, because look at Foreigner. Mick Jones barely goes out anymore. The original band is not playing together, yet Foreigner is still playing gigs. So is that a nostalgia act? Yeah. What would you call that?
Yeah,
look at REO Speedwagon.
Because
now defunct. And of course, we had issues with Bruce Hall and Kevin Cronin. Kevin Cronin broke the band up. Now Kevin's going out with the band. Yeah. And I think it's pretty much the same band.
That's really weird to me. That's really weird to me that, like, just call it. I don't know what kind of legal things happen behind the scenes, but it's just like, just call it REO Speedwagon, or at least Kevin Cronin's REO Speedwagon or something.
Well,
I don't know.
I think that's what he's doing. But look at Foreigner. There's no original members. And what else? Great White before.
And they're not doing new material either. Foreigner is not like doing new material, you know.
What about Journey? Journey are still doing their thing or not?
Well, yeah, they're still doing their thing, but you got Nilsson still in the band, and what's his name? Keyboard,
Jonathan Kane.
Jonathan Kane. But even though he wasn't an original member, the only original member that's still in Journey is Nilsson.
Yeah.
Is that a nostalgia act? Just throwing it out.
Well, they put out new albums every so often. I mean, whether they play, I'm sure they don't do a lot of new material live, but at least Journey and even Styx, they'll be putting out new albums. So, and I think that kind of keeps them a little fresh, maybe, and not from being a total nostalgia act.
Yeah, but the thing is, what designates a nostalgia act?
But Foreigner, I think, is probably almost the exception, because the members of Foreigner that are there, although there's none of the original Foreigner, some of those members of Foreigner have been in the band for nearly 20 years.
So same with REO. So what's that mean?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I mean, and
that's what happened with Molly Hatchet as well.
For a second. But what it reminds me of, when I was 8, my mum took me to Wembley Arena to watch the Harlem Globetrotters, and in the Harlem Globetrotters there was all the same characters playing that were exactly the same as my mum had seen back in the 40s, but somebody else playing the part. But we still thought
like
we were seeing the Harlem Globetrotters. Not for one moment did we say, no, that's a fake. They're not the real Harlem Globetrotters. And they probably weren't even the replacement of the ones my mum had seen. They were probably 3rd or 4th generation replacements. But we still thought we were seeing the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah, but they're not producing any music, though, Parish.
No, but they're still playing the same basketball, the same tricks. People are coming along to see.
They're playing the hits.
Yeah, but a lot of people would never remember that because they didn't put any physical product out. You know, where people can go back and go, oh,
like
look
posters
at
or something.
Yeah,
like,
you know
well,
what
I don't know. There's videos of watching them. You know.
Yeah, but it's different. It's different.
Well, all I'm saying is it really any different? I'm not so sure it is.
Well, look at Kiss. Kiss become a nostalgia act.
If they go home really enjoying it, and I think Foreigner, I saw them about 18 months ago, and I was lucky in that Mick Jones actually played, so I did see one member, but very few people there realised that wasn't Lou Gramm singing.
Well, look at that. You're 100% right, because the casual fan doesn't care. The casual fan just wants you to play the hits, and they don't really care. But if you're hardcore, like most of the Contrarians are, or Sea of Tranquility, we all care.
Yeah, but this is
let me throw this to you then. Over the last 5 years, Cheap Trick, if Robin Zander or Rick Nielsen has been ill, one of their children has stepped in and done it instead. And I've watched those shows on YouTube, and they've been pretty good shows. So it's not beyond likelihood that in 10 years' time, Cheap Trick will still be going, but with all of the children of the original band in the band.
I'm out then.
I don't know about that, but
why? Yeah, but why shouldn't they though? It's
there's no rule that says they can't.
No, they're more. If they can go out and sell it, more power to them. But I don't know. There's like a personality though, like to a lot of bands, to Cheap Trick, especially with Rick Nielsen and Robin Zander, and Bunny Carlos hasn't been in the band for a while, but he was a big part of that too, I thought. But I don't know. It just depends, for the next generation, maybe that Cheap Trick will be good. For our generation, like maybe that won't be, but maybe that'll be a good Cheap Trick version of Cheap Trick, going out playing hits, maybe doing new music. As possible. I mean,
and that's
it could work.
Like what generations exactly? Like we should start thinking in terms of millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, whatever. Like what do everyone listen to? And here's my other thing. First of all, do we see any bands that are like a throwback to the 90s or to the early noughties? No, most of them are
not yet
70s and 80s.
Oh yeah, no,
not yet.
I disagree.
Philip, not yet.
You see loads of throwbacks to the 90s.
Like who?
Alternative rock,
whole
maybe.
Post-grunge music scene, I would say. Most of those bands are 90s.
Yeah, they were influenced by grunge and stuff. A lot of bands coming up now. They were
Yeah,
kind
but
of,
so a lot of bands influenced by Pearl Jam and Nirvana
and even Creed and stuff.
yeah.
Creed, yeah, oof,
Oh,
yeah.
So I would
oh
say,
God, did we just mention
there's
Creed?
bands that come through that have that kind of alternate music sound coming through now.
Yeah,
I think
again,
Creed
you
gets a
see-
bad rap because if you don't listen to their hits, if you listen to an album, they actually, especially Mark Tremonti's really good on guitar.
Yeah, he's a great guitar player. He's great. But like, I insist that there is a difference between influenced and being a clear throwback to something else.
So you said there
Well-
wasn't band. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said there was bands that don't. There's not many bands coming through that sound like that from the 90s.
Oh.
I think there's quite a lot of bands that sound like the 90s. That
Sound
maybe
like-
not like in the same extent as nostalgia bands,
Yeah.
but you can still hear that sound in there.
Yeah. No, I think that maybe I haven't done all my homework. I just have very specific bands here. Like, for example, I have the Swedish band who appeared in 2010, 2011, Blues Pills. I'm sure you guys have maybe heard of them.
Yeah.
They kind of exploded with their debut album, the self-titled, which was like a very, very obvious throwback to like early British blues boom with a lot of like soul and Emerson, what's it called? Jefferson Airplane.
Mhm.
A guitar player who was like playing these really fiery kind of solos over this very soulful kind of bluesy thing, and everything on it screamed like flower power, British blues boom, the way they would dress on stage and everything was like watching some kind of thing between hippies and flower power and 70s like Zeppelin sort of thing. And if you hear what they play today, it's a throwback to basically soul, Motown, and everything revolving around this this female singer, Ellen Larson, who I think she sounds a lot like she's trying to do her own thing on Aretha Franklin and all the sort of women of Motown and soul, basically. But it really feels like they are nostalgic for that period. That's the thing with Blues Pills, for instance.
Yeah.
Trying to find
Another band that I like that is very influenced by the 70s is a band called Lucifer.
Yeah, I had them too.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
They're very like reminiscent of a 70s doom band, or maybe just a rock band, maybe hard rock band of the 70s. And it's more like how they like just they get those 70s sounds when they're recording, they get the drums to sound a way that the 70s drums sounded, and the guitars are real like clean, not like a lot of, it's real like from an amp type of distortion, no pedal type of thing. And
yeah, and the thing is that you can imagine these people when they get together to make music on the premise that maybe for them the way music is being done today is not the right way. Digital doesn't work for them. Modern recording technology doesn't work for them, etc., etc. So like they are really trying to go back in time in some way. And that brings me to my other example, which is a NYC band who have released 2 albums. They're called Tanith, and it's basically a power trio with male and female vocals. And this is a band who, from the get-go, decided to use only vintage amps, vintage speakers, and they record only to tape. And what you hear is basically what was played in the 70s and we would later call proto-metal. Very like early UFO, early Thin Lizzy, and you can hear like you can feel like the guitar has a certain warmth. You can feel that there's an organic sound.
So would you class
playing.
them as nostalgia and vintage bands?
I would totally classify Tanith, if you've heard of them. I would classify them as a vintage band, most definitely. I think that's part of their aim. They are using vintage technology, even recording to tape, and what you hear really feels and sounds like some kind of analog creation from that period. Like my father would listen to music on tape. It really
Real,
feels
real, yeah.
like that. And I have to say that a session musician, guitar player in Tanith from 2010 and onward was our own Andy Blacksugar.
Oh,
Oh,
There
I'll
you
be
go.
darned. All right. Cool.
well,
Well, I'm trying to find a CD, but I can't find it. Pete Pardo on Sea of Tranquility talked about this band, and then I'm going to review it on the review crew when I'm on there with Jamie Laszlo. There's a band called Magic Potion that put out an
Oh yeah,
album
yeah,
recently.
yeah.
Okay. Very, you might want to call it stoner rock, whatever, but it's very similar to early Black Sabbath. I don't know any details about the recording, but I really like the record, and it sounds whatever these gentlemen did, it sounds like it's 1972. And the songs are great. God, I wish I could find it. Where did I do with it? Anyway, songs are great. Production's great. It takes you right back in time.
There you go.
So this is one of those bands that I think really is a good example of how it should be done. I they do have their own individual sound, but they totally harken back to something from 1971.
Yeah,
So that Magic Potion,
that's the
and
idea. Yeah.
and I think it works well. I mean, you could call Greta Van Fleet very similar to that, but not quite as this really sounds like you're in 1972,
Yeah.
1971.
Oh, yeah, listen to Tanith. Listen to Tanith. It's like it's not just the compositions, but it's really the recording, how it sounds. It
Right,
feels like nothing that you hear today. And it's so 70s that it feels original,
right.
at a time when we're saturated with all this.
And but you know what, Philip, that's really quite a feat because with modern technology, it's hard to duplicate the sounds from that era.
not
'Cause
really though.
you know,
You got things now. You got things that'll replicate things really good now. You can get the guitar amp. You can get a Marshall guitar amp, plug-in, I guess, or whatever you call it.
a plug-in.
Yeah, you can get a
A
plug-in
plug-in,
for even a certain mic.
Mhm.
If you want a Marshall that sounded like it was recorded with a RA40 or whatever it is, you can get it. I mean,
yeah, that's the thing.
I'm not exactly saying that's what the band Magic Potion did, but whatever they've done, it's very authentic sounding.
what about the name Magic Potion?
Great with a
I mean,
different
that's a
spelling.
band name for that period,
Mhm.
Totally.
I
And
love it. I think it's great.
yeah, yeah. And the band that basically kind of like started this for me, and a band which I think many younger generations will be listening to as a gateway to Led Zeppelin and maybe also to Bad Company, are my favorite one, Rival Sons.
Hmm.
I'm sure you guys have heard them.
Yep.
yeah.
I saw them back in 2012 in Scotland, when I was studying there, and I saw them in a small club. And I remember saying to my mate who was with me, "These guys one day are gonna play in arenas, and we are lucky to be able to see them now in a small club." And what do you think?
Yeah.
They were supporting Black Sabbath on the End tour, and now they play in big festivals. They've become a really big name. They've managed to break through into the American market as well, because first they were very popular in Europe. And like the album that kind of broke new ground for them was Pressure and Time. The self-titled song, had like 1 million views on YouTube just like a year or so after its release in 2011 to 2012. And if you hear that song, Pressure and Time, the main riff there goes like a da 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 da. That is like copy paste the riff of On the Tiles from Led Zeppelin 3. Like the guys had no issue like just like referencing Led Zeppelin to the bone. And it took them a few years to kind of evolve and to create their own sound, their own style, which is more like a blend of many different things. But they did feel originally as a throwback to like Soul, Led Zeppelin, what's his name? From Bad Company.
Yeah, Paul Rogers.
Paul Rogers, thank you. and all of that. But like again, you see them on stage, the way they look. Come on, the hat, the handlebar mustache, the shoes, everything. It's like we want to go back to the 70s, you know?
It's
Because they're
interesting.
amazing.
Yeah.
They're an absolutely amazing band, and live, like you go to their shows and you leave like energized. It's an amazing
So,
experience.
are you saying that you did, because you started by sounding like you didn't think these nostalgia acts were valid, but now I think
No, on the
they
contrary,
are valid.
the valid gimmick thing, someone else added it. I just wrote, why are there so many like nostalgia bands?
Right.
Oh, maybe that was Marco adding that. I don't know.
Maybe it was Marco, I don't know. But
Damn it, Marco, what are you doing?
I think that there are many people who complain that like there's nothing original anymore. Everything sounds like something else, or these guys or those guys sound too much like that. Like Greta Van Fleet, everyone's like they're a copy of Led Zeppelin. Why would I want to listen to them if I can
Right.
just listen to Led Zeppelin? Crownlands. Why listen to them if I can just listen
Exactly.
to Rush? Right? For me, Greta
So I
Van
already
Fleet
heard all the Led
doesn't work.
Zeppelin, and I need to hear something else that's like Led Zeppelin too. You
Yeah.
know,
Well,
Like,
that's
for me
like what my
personally-
buddy said. That's why would you listen to this when you can listen to the originator?
But I'm
listen
tired
to
of
a
all the Led
copy?
Zeppelin. I've heard them all.
How can you be
15 million times.
tired of Led Zeppelin? No one's tired of Led Zeppelin.
Well,
I've heard their
Like-
I'm not tired. I'm tired, but I don't need like I've heard their songs over and over, like especially growing up in the radio on the radio, and you know, and playing their albums. And I just, you know, if I mean, every once in a while I'll put on a Led Zeppelin album, but I just don't need to hear it all the time. I like to hear like something that's been influenced by that, because
Mhm.
it'll satisfy that Zeppelin Jones in me that they can't even satisfy anymore.
I don't know. It's somewhere in the finer details. It's like when I hear Greta Van Fleet, I hear a band that is made of good musicians who have chemistry, but
Yeah.
they try to sound like Zeppelin, but they don't get it. When I
But
hear
they
My
try. Do
Sons,
we know for a fact they're trying to sound like Zeppelin? Maybe
Well,
that's just the way they sound.
come
I'm just
on.
throwing it out there.
The one thing I also remember from I remember when STP came out and Creed, people were saying they were Pearl Jam ripoffs. You know, they were saying,
Right.
I remember thinking when I first heard them, I was like, oh yeah, but when you listen to them, they're not though. They're like they just came up at that same time, and
And it just so happens because of Pearl Jam, I think because of popularity, you used to see this back in the 60s. Okay, so you've got Pearl Jam who's successful. Like in the 60s, you had the Beatles that were successful. So all these record companies are looking at other bands that sound like that to capitalize on it. Now, I don't think SOT sounds like Pearl Jam. There's similarities, but I could see what were they on Atlantic? Where Atlantic would sign sign them to their label because they need to have something to compete with. So, you know, it's similar, but it's not really the same, you know?
yeah.
That's been
But
going
yeah.
on for years, forever, you know?
Yeah. But there's like STP and all these guys who appear more or less at the same time. But then you have bands that appear 30 and 40 years later than
Right.
the original pioneers, you know? And they are, and you have like all these older people who are complaining about Greta Van Fleet, but their concerts are full of young people.
Yeah.
So it's
They're
like a
definitely a popular
rebirth.
act.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, that maybe they can be a gateway to Zeppelin for them, you know? I mean, that's how it is.
Or
probably.
maybe not. I mean, there's definitely a thing about when you get into music, you want to like your bands. You don't want to listen to what your dad listened to. You don't want to listen to what your older brother listened to.
Yeah.
So, you know, kids coming along now, they want to discover their own bands. And they may hear Greta Van Fleet and think they're fantastic. They may never go and listen to Led Zeppelin because Led Zeppelin is what their dad or their granddad listened to. They're not interested. So they will
Not
take
cool.
what they see them to be today. And I think that's great. I think that's exactly as it should be. Because I was listening to rock and roll artists that came out in the 70s. And all my dad ever used to say is, oh, they just sound like the bands I used to like in the 50s. But not to me, they didn't, because they were my bands. They weren't his bands, they were my bands. So So I think it's great that people young, who are coming through now discovering certain music for the first time and are liking these bands, and it may be a gateway through to these older bands, and it might not. I mean, let's be honest. I was never encouraged to go off and listen to artists from the 1920s when I was listening to Queen. I mean, Queen was hugely influenced by what went on in the 19th.
Okay. So when you heard Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you didn't want to listen to saloon music?
No, it never influenced me to go and listen to classical or anything like that. When I listened to ELO, no interest at all.
Yeah, and like Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin didn't really make me want to go listen to blues too much.
No.
I just
because they did a great job at
they reinterpreted
together.
It was a reinterpretation, their spin on it.
Just
Led Zeppelin, I mean, Aerosmith. Yeah, I'm sure there was influences, but they kind of did they're more. I hear more of the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith than I hear pure blues. Or the Yardbirds and people.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, can we even say that the term nostalgia is not very legitimate in the end? It's not valid term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh.
Whenever I get into my car, and I turn on the car and I get the radio automatically, the first thing I hear is 80s radio, 80s nostalgia.
Yeah.
Even today, 40 years later, 80s nostalgia. What about noughties nostalgia or 1995 nostalgia? I don't know.
I'm hearing a lot more 90s stuff on classic rock radio now than it is getting in there. I know there is a radio station during the week. It's talk, but on the weekends it plays music, and they are doing a 90s themed weekends, and they've been doing it for a couple months now. So I think the 90s are coming up a little bit. This is people coming of age. It's the people coming of age, getting older, and wanting that nostalgia.
Depend on the radio stations you listen to. So I listen to 70s nostalgia radio stations. My wife gets in the car and she listens to 80s. My two sons are in their 30s, get in the car, and they make me turn it on to either 90s or 2000s.
It's all where you grew up in.
So there's nostalgia stations for probably all the way up to 2020, I would suspect, if you want to go and listen to them. So
yeah,
certainly in the UK, there's plenty of 2000s and 1990s nostalgia stations out there.
Let me ask you another question. Do you think that there's any particular genre at the moment in which there is something new happening, something totally life-changing somehow?
I mean, I'm not a fan, but I know that country music is going through quite a different phase right now as far as things that are being incorporated into country music now. We're talking about combining two different styles, but there's a lot more hip hop and stuff getting into country music now, and a lot more dancey based, kind of thing. Rock also is an influence, but also there's rock in there as well.
Yeah.
So country seems to be doing a lot of different things right now.
What I find,
like I said, I'm not a big fan, but just from what I see going on, Beyonce just had a big country album.
Well, it's really country exists anymore because it's more country tinged pop.
That's true too. Yeah, they said that about Shania Twain. About that was not really country. It was
that's all thanks to Taylor Swift.
Country.
Yeah,
but at least they're doing songs. I mean, rap isn't really. Do songs exist other than within the country realm? Just saying.
And pop, and then some of the pop stuff.
Well, pop.
But pop's just always the same. It's like this, cookie cutter type stuff. Where countries, I think, it's going through a phase right now where it's evolving. I think, and a lot of different influences.
I don't tend to listen out for stuff that's new, so I can't really answer.
Yeah, me either.
I think there's new stuff out there or new styles, but there's certainly relatively new artists out there that I think are good. I think Bruno Mars is great, and I think what he does is very typical of what went on in the 80s in some ways, but I think he's good. I think Adele, I think Adele's very good, and that sort of old soulful bluesy voice. I like some of the Ed Sheeran stuff. Can I listen to a whole album? No, but I think some of the singles he's brought out
And he's a bit of a
pretty
douche.
good.
Yeah, I can't just listen to Ed. No.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter whether we like them.
All right.
They're the ones who are coming through and are driving music today. They're the ones. I mean, I was absolutely amazed that Adele has got something like 2 or 3 of the best-selling albums ever. And I think she's got 3 albums in the best-selling top 20 of all time.
Yeah.
And people say, but records don't sell anymore. Well, clearly they do for some people, because she's sold so many, so there's definitely, and again, whether you like Taylor Swift or don't like Taylor Swift, she's keeping music live. She's getting people going to concerts. She's getting people interested. So there's definitely artists there that are still driving it forward. How much of that's new music? How much of that is cutting edge? Probably not a lot of it, but maybe that was always the case with the big stars. Maybe they were never really cutting edge.
What I will say is, because I listen to a lot of prog rock and a lot of prog metal, a lot of what we call today prog metal is nothing than what we would call it in the 90s, like with Queensryche, Dream Theater, Fate's Warning, etc. You get all these new bands who play this kind of thing that basically is djent, with 7-string guitars, 8-string guitars, Animals as leaders, Tesseract, whatever. Not really crazy about them, but this is what everyone's calling prog metal today. And they are using a style, a certain sound, and even like all these guitars, and it doesn't sound like anything that we would call prog metal, starting with Rush and going into Dream Theater and all these other bands that started copying Dream Theater. It sounds like something totally new. I wouldn't call it prog metal, but this is what young people today are calling prog metal. And I think it's very new and very different. It feels different. It feels like a new definition of prog metal. Nothing like what I'm used to.
There's also like technical death metal, also like the
all of that,
latest Blood Incantation album.
Yeah. Their new album has made big waves. Yeah,
it's like, and I'm not into death metal, but I checked that out because I heard about the review crew and they were raving about it, and I checked it out. And I liked it. It's very wild, the different styles that are in it, and they can still get away in them, but they still like do some death metal stuff as well. And,
So is death metal the one with the growls?
Yeah.
Cookie Monster vocals.
Because
not all the way. Not with this album, it isn't all the way through though. With this album, it isn't all the way through. There's different. It's in parts of it, and then other parts it gets slow and proggy and spacey, and then it will start being death again. So it's really weird.
All right, cool. Well, I don't know
if covered an hour almost then.
All right. Anyway, so I don't know if we can.
We just talked for an hour about.
We just talked for an hour about it. We do want to hear from you in the chat, but this is the kind of show I kind of like, because we throw out a topic. I want to commend Philip for this topic because it spurred a great discussion. Whether or not we've come up with a solution or a real opinion, hey, it's all about talking about music, and
that's the thing.
That's all that matters.
All these bands and artists, they just do what really comes to them naturally. Greta Van Fleet will always do this because this is what really comes naturally to them to play. The guitar player catches the guitar, and this is what comes out of his fingers, And as a teacher of mine once said, influence is like influenza. You get it without being aware that you got it.
There you go. What a way to end the show.
Yeah.
So anyway, everybody in the chat, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Please leave a comment about this topic down below. I want to thank Philip for coming up with this topic. Brilliant. Keep it coming. The Elder of Rock, and of course, the Parish of Rock. Anyway, what's next on the channel? This probably, since everybody knows my woes when I was talking about it before, it's probably this. So I want to thank the panel. Like I said, please like, subscribe. If you'd like to be on these panels, we'd love to have you. We have a Ko-fi account. Buy us a pint or a cup of coffee. We also have a Patreon account if you'd like to do that. Hey, we'd love to have you. We also take donations. It's all about talking music on the Contrarian. So please subscribe. Stay tuned. We've got a lot more great content. Gentlemen, I want to wish you a thank you. You have anything else, Philip, before we wrap it up?
No.
Anybody
I'm
else?
good. I'm good.
Elder? He's
No,
good. Parish?
No, nothing more.
All right, Parish. I will be in contact, obviously. So, all right, we'll see you. Keep it real and keep it clean. We'll see you on the next one.